Welcome back to New Persuasive Words. I am, as always and ever, Scott Jones.
And I'm Bill Bohr. Hello, Scott.
Bill, nice to see you.
Good seeing you as well.
Tuesday here. And, it's another day in reality, in the new reality in which I mean, what does the hymn say? Morning by morning, new mercies I see, right? Quoting Lamentations.
Our morning by morning. New mercies we need.
New mercies we need. So apparently in the middle of the night last night, Elon Musk tweeted out that he was a 3,000-year-old time-traveling alien who assumes different identities.
Well, that really clears up a lot for me, actually.
Yeah, I mean, this is I suppose people were saying that they found clones of him. Like in the article I sent you, there's a picture of a guy named Raymond Kolashaw from 1914 in World War I looking gear, and he looks a little like Elon Musk, and people are swearing that this is Elon. So I guess Elon is saying
that's him. Yeah,
that's him. Yeah. So people, I mean, he's doing a lot of so this guy is a 1914 fighter pilot who people are identifying with him. Oh, actually, the quote, I don't want to misquote him here, right? Because on this show, we're for accuracy and truth in reporting. Underneath the image, I guess, of this guy, he'd written, "Full disclosure, I'm actually a 3,000-year-old vampire. It's such a trial assuming these false identities over the centuries." So then the user queried, "You don't sleep because you're a vampire?" And to which he responded, "Well, this is a lot of late night. This is the guy that's going to be fixing the government, by the way.
Right, very good, yeah.
Very good with time management." He responds, "I'm a time-traveling vampire." Before issuing a correction, lower down the thread, time-traveling vampire alien. So a vampire and an alien.
Right. Yeah. Huh.
So, I'm just putting that out there.
Wasn't that a David Bowie movie? I think so.
I guess so. Also, I want to bring one other thing to your attention, Bill. This is why you need me. I tell you about things like this. There's a new horror movie coming out called Popeye the Slayer.
Oh.
Where these group of, I'm sure, youngish folks who are investigating this
or working on our college project. They're working on a college project.
Right. Before the funding gets cut. And they're investigating this rumor that there's actually a haunting presence at the spinach factory. Well, and this is Popeye. It's Popeye the Slayer, who then I watched the trailer and it's pretty gruesome, and with the big forearms, and he does eat the spinach still. He's maybe he's undead, but he still needs to eat, and he eats the spinach and then smashes people's head with his bare hands.
Well, you know what? Because you sent this to me, I should have resisted the temptation, but I too went and followed the trailer, and apparently there was contamination at the spinach plant because there was an owner who happened to be a 3,000-year-old alien vampire that was experimenting on his spinach workers. I think how we tie these stories together. And I also think if you really want a model of true masculinity, if you can't have Popeye the Slayer, you go to today's topic.
I was thinking that, look, what you have in Popeye the Slayer is you have something that was treasured by millions for decades and now is turned into something horrifying with environmental disaster. It sounds like great viewing for January 6th.
Yeah, there we go. Well, it's also, remember like the Bill Murray movie Scrooged, which is hilarious.
Yeah, I like that movie. Movie.
Remember, as a spoof, they had Lee Majors in The Day the Reindeer Died.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But there's actually a movie like that in the theaters now with The Rock, and apparently,
Red 1.
Yeah, so apparently, although I'm a fan of The Rock, so whatever he does is okay by me. So
Red One.
Red
Well, this
One.
is again taking timeless traditions and turning them horrific. It's just, it's I just thought it might have something to do with the cultural moment.
Yeah, but maybe there's a movie in the works that makes Herod the Great really the hero.
Speaking of horrific appropriation of classic traditions, let's go to Peterson on the Bible.
And we're not talking about Doug Peterson, soon to be fired coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, or Eugene Peterson of blessed memory.
We are not.
No, we are talking about the patron saint of the 2024 election.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson. I mean,
Peterson. Yeah,
he is someone who is a major kind of cultural figure,
right?
Who made it kind of big in decades ago. He was a real academic and a psychologist.
Right.
And he was,
by the way, is going after January is going to start costing us 25% more to talk about him.
With the tariffs, it's Canadian. Yeah. What is that going to do to our podcast for our folks who listen to? We do have
Canadian
consistent Canadian listeners. So this is
I think what's 25% of nothing. I think that's gonna
exactly. It's a steal. It's a steal.
Yeah, but anyway, but good. We love our Canadian listeners too.
There's some of our favorite. I love the Canadian and the poorly educated. I love the poorly educated. So
they actually be better educated than.
Yeah, that's true. Our demo is pretty brainy. Our demo. So Peterson got his PhD in clinical psych at McGill University. I actually looked at going to grad school.
It's great school.
And he, during his intellectual formation there, he delved into cognitive and behavioral theories of psychology. Also, kind of delved into psychotherapy and was mixing sort of. He became an interdisciplinary figure who kind of blended psychology, philosophy, literature, and even mythology to some degree. And
how about time travel? Was that part of the mixture?
There was no time travel.
No time travel
to date, but who knows? With I don't know if he'll be at the inauguration. I'm guessing not. By the way, great dresser. If you Google pictures of Jordan Peterson, he's got some wonderful sports coats that I think are just outstanding. He's got a real keen fashion sense.
And today's sponsor is Canadian Sports Coats.
I'm telling you,
buy them while you can, folks. While you can,
I'm honest here. I'm equal opportunity.
By the way, I told an executive from Orvis that I plugged Orvis on our last podcast. She laughed and she said, we can use all the publicity we can get. So,
all publicity is good publicity.
And by the way, in spite of what you hear, Vermont is not part of Canada, so that will not be affected by the tariff. So if you're looking for Christmas presents out there, Orvis, where all your fishing needs are met.
Do you know that I read today that Justin Trudeau is increasing the immigration standards? He was saying that he proposed letting in 500,000 new people fleeing north in 2025 and 26. So I'm serious that they're increasing the thresholds.
And we're just going to look at the Niagara Falls, if anybody asks. We just want to look at the falls from the Canadian side.
Exactly.
Which is a better view. It's a better view. Yeah.
If we did the show in Canada, we would get free healthcare. That's for sure.
There we go.
Which we're certainly not getting here.
No.
But so Peterson became a figure on the cultural right when there was some Canadian legislation years ago about trans language and pronouns and mandating some kind of observance of pronouns. Peterson was staunchly against this. He's what now many people would call a free speech absolutist. I mean, I don't know how I feel about that term, but that's a term that's bantered around in the cultural commentariat. And he said, I don't have anything against trans people. I have something against government mandated speech. I think this is always a bad thing and it leads to totalitarianism. And so eventually his star, I guess, rose on the cultural right in North America and I guess elsewhere too. And he's become a kind of more than a psychologist, but a pop intellectual who comments on all manner sort of issues from the cultural to the political. Famously, a couple of years ago, he debated Slavoj Žižek, the famous Yugoslavian philosopher. Great conversation. It was really interesting. I watched it when it happened. It was amazing. I was more impressed with Žižek than Peterson, but it was a great conversation.
Was that a surprise?
No, it was not a surprise. But Peterson has just come out with a book called We Who Wrestle with God. Now, it seems as though he's been doing these lectures for years, and they're on YouTube, where he lectures on the Bible and Western mythology and sort of blends his insights into his own psychoanalytical and philosophical matrix, and sees the biblical text as the kind of source material for archetypes, right? For Jungian and archetypes, and he kind of takes these archetypes and blends them in with some Nietzsche and some other continental philosophers.
He's just redoing Joseph Campbell from a slightly right of center libertarian perspective.
Hey, he might be a libertarian, but he's Canadian. He's got healthcare.
Okay.
He's got healthcare, right? I mean, it's not.
No, but that's interesting stuff, right? I mean, I think, Richard Rohr, he's a very Jungian reader of the Christian tradition, Franciscan, so he's on the edges of Catholicism, but he's still in communion. But yeah, that stuff I find really interesting. I've always liked that. I mean, Rene Girard, someone who we both are big fans of. Part of that talk is there's something to these stories. There's something to these symbols. I mean, again, what kind of fruit grows on a tree of knowledge of good and evil? How is it that a 90-year-old guy God can't take a 90-year-old guy in a wrestling match? It has to go all night. I mean, and obviously the biblical narratives invites this kind of interpretation, right?
Yeah, it does. I mean, and I think, look, I mean, in a pluralistic society, I think that the text of Scripture is not uniquely the possession of the church or the synagogue, right? I mean, that it's part of the Western intellectual tradition and cultural heritage. So sometimes people take it up. And lots of interesting figures, do this sort of running commentary and work with the Bible. I want to read something that just because it's just worth quoting it, not at massive length, but it gives a sense of the project. This is from Rowan Williams, former Archbishop of Canterbury, who's reviewing this book, which deals with Genesis, Exodus, and I think a little bit of Jonah. He says of Peterson's book, he says at one level, its structure and argument are clear enough. The scriptural text confronts us, says Peterson, with a set of life and death choices. We can conform our rebellious fantasies and myth-driven aspirations to the underlying moral structure of reality, or we can refuse. If we refuse, we wreck our own lives and those of others. If instead we recognize reality, we then face two sorts of pressure. There is the social pressure to adjust, not to reality itself, but to fashionable orthodoxies, particularly around gender fluidity, racial sensitivities, the reluctance to call people to responsibility for their actions. And there is the internal pressure of a self-serving sentimental quest for low-cost answers to challenges of moral significance. False comparison, over-identification with the supposedly vulnerable, cheap indulgence of the surface wants of self and others. But if we're prepared to stand firm in the face of these pressures, the reward is a life of integrity, inner strength, and the capacity for living with adventure, which is apparently a favorite one of his words. The stories of Jewish scripture, read with a strong admixture of Christian material, provide stark illustrations of the consequence of dishonesty or unreality, and powerful images of the kind of integration and strength generated by obedience to the truth. So here we have the kind of, I think why I read that is it gives a sense of what he's getting at. And also that it's interesting that the delusions and the mythologies that are deleterious that you embrace and stuff, these tend to be cultural narratives of the left, right? It's gender fluidity, it's people with pronoun, obsessive, use of pronouns, all this stuff. So these apparently are the chief culprits of the self-delusion,
as opposed to like the myth of the noble cause, right? Of course, he's Canadian, so I mean, I think.
When was the last time a Canadian had a cause? Come on,
stop it. But like the lost, the Southern myth of what the Civil War was really about, right? The ahistorical, which was actually, I mean, the propaganda was really, really early. Matter of fact, I just read General Thomas. I forget his first name, but he had already, he died in 1970, or 1870. So he was writing like in the late 1860s, already criticizing this emerging myth of the noble cause. So yeah, there are some that white men are put on in this society, but somehow we are an oppressed group. So there are mythologies of both the left and the right. That's absolutely the case.
Yeah, I want to just share one other assessment of this. This is by Martha Gill, and this is from The Guardian, and she's sort of talking about a little bit about Peterson and this sort of his own, this most recent work and how it illustrates his broader work. He says, manifesting, Jordan Peterson, the phenomena are pitched at different consumers, right? She's talking about manifesting, the sort of the secret, that sort of stuff. Manifesting, Jordan Peterson, the phenomena are pitched at different consumers. Peterson's audience leans right and male, but at the core, they offer a similar thing: self-improvement wrapped up in spirituality, a system of faith that also promises to help you achieve your personal goals. And in this sense, they are part of a rising tide of what we will, for short, call nonsense. With mainstream religion in the West in long-term decline, something else is emerging. Not quite religion, not quite self-help, but a tantalizing mix of the two, where self-improvement sections of bookshops once contained straightforward advice on dating, dieting, and getting rich quick. Now they ask you to buy into a whole can of spiritual beliefs, call it mystical self-help.
Yeah, right.
And she's basically saying that she links this to, again, religious decline, the intellectual and spiritual depth of the West thinning out. And, nature abhors a vacuum, right? And so this is sort of a part of it. And I like her framing, that while it's Oprah or The Secret and manifesting on the left, this is for right-wing guys, and it's more muscular, and it's a little more kind of, it tries to be a little more moral than the power of positive thinking, right? But it's still that kind of, nonetheless, I suppose.
Yeah, the old adage: those who believe in nothing will fall for anything. Yeah, I think there's something to that, right? Well, like you said, there's a vacuum. Myth helps make sense of the world, right? Myth, religion, faith, and just because you reject one system of beliefs doesn't mean you do away with that need, right? I mean, I think you read like Carl Sagan, and now and Neil, what's his name? I just lost it. Neil deGrasse
Tyson.
Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm sorry, guy's name wrong. But they also, in their demytholizing or their anti-religious, they create new kinds of mythology. So it's, I mean, even Jung is kind of doing that, right? I mean, in reacting to Freud's kind of anti-religion, his project is kind of creating new mythical structures out of old things. It's an interesting kind of process.
Yeah, and there's some things. Let me say that I'll say the things. There's some stuff. I by the way, we have not read neither of us has read the book of We Who Wrestle with God. It's apparently quite long, and I was looking for a copy of it, and I couldn't find a copy in the library or anything. So I didn't want to purchase it, actually. But yeah, if anyone does purchase it, I'll read it. But send it to us. But I did find an interesting little book on Kindle, which was by a guy named James Caldwell, who I don't know. But he wrote a book called Examining the Mind of the Author of We Who Wrestle with God. And it's actually quite good. I mean,
it's not a critical assessment. It's just kind of point of fact.
Yeah, right? Just sort of telling you this stuff. It's just telling you, kind of what the deal is here. And he said, there's this great summary paragraph. He said, in Peterson's interpretation, God also symbolizes the balance between order and chaos. He believes that life inherently contains both structured order, rules, traditions, societal norms, and chaotic elements, uncertainty, suffering, and change. For Peterson, the concept of God helps individuals navigate this balance, providing a symbol of order and stability that encourages them to confront and overcome chaos. This balance between order and chaos is a recurring theme in Peterson's work, and his symbolic interpretation of God serves as a guiding force for individuals striving to live meaningful, balanced lives. So, I mean, what he sees in, say, the patriarchs, or in these, or strangely in Jonah, I don't get this. Apparently, in Jonah, he sees a warning about prioritizing the natural world over human life, which I don't. That's
I mean, there's a lot of Jungian interpretations of Jonah. So that's, but I didn't
get with it. But again, you see that, these patriarchs are figures that, they're this tension between vacillating between order and chaos, right? And Peterson thinks both are the essence of life, right? You need to engage. If you attempt to deny uncertainty, suffering, chaos, and things like this, you'll wind up with delusion and repression, right? I mean, this is part of the reality of life, and yet, we need structure, order, traditions to sort of make sense and map out reality and have a reality that is coherent, that we can talk about, that we can make stories about, that we can experiment on. I mean, we talked about this book forever ago. I don't remember what we did, but a little bit about Brian Gerish's Saving in Secular Faith, which is a wonderful book where he talks about there is the secular faith that we need. We need faith in institutions and order and science and human progress and all these things. Without these things, we just would, we would drift off into nihilism. So, I mean, I think that to me is kind of interesting, right? I mean, I think this sort of balance, the yin and yang between the order that tradition provides and that it's sort of conduit to things like discipline and self growth and things like that, to personal growth and things like that. At the same time, not minimizing the darker side, the shadow side of life, and engaging that authentically. I mean, that to me is interesting stuff.
Well, yeah, I do too. And it's interesting to me that you've got this kind of there's this. Didn't his wife convert to Catholicism? I think I saw that a couple of years ago. Pictures of his wife being received into the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, what's interesting to me, and I don't know enough about Peterson to make any judgments about his life, but you've got.
What you know about Peterson could be filled up in a very, very small set of note cards.
Right. It's been
a lot of it was quadrupled by me.
Right.
In the past 48 hours.
And I would say that, and I would like to own it. It's been a conscious decision to know as little about him as possible. And maybe that's unfair. I was just reacting to what he seemed to be doing, 20 years ago, whenever he first started this project. But, you look at it like J.D. Vance conversion to Catholicism. You look at did Russell Brand become a Roman Catholic or just some version of Christian?
No, he's a Protestant, and he was just at Tully and Shavidian's church.
Right. But you have these interesting, questionable figures, who have lived interesting lives, who are embracing. It's an interesting thing. And again, the trouble with celebrity conversions, I think it's bad for them. And not that they're converted, but it's bad that they bring their celebrity with them, right? Because that can have a really detrimental effect, I think, on their spiritual growth. But this kind of embracing a muscular Christianity or a muscular paganism, or what interesting that it's just an interesting season that on one level, allowing our faith to help us embrace what it means to be to be a man. I think that's, I had a great conversation a couple weeks ago. I have a handful of guys from my church, high school guys. We do a breakfast club. And so when I asked them, what do because there's been a lot of talk of what it means to be a man. And certainly some people were saying that was part of what happened in the election. But it was really great to hear these high school adolescent boys, again, adolescent boys, not notoriously known for their depth, right? But when I asked them what makes a good man, they were giving me the fruits of the spirit. It was pretty remarkable. I mean, it's really a tribute, I think, to our church and to their parents. But they were saying what makes a real man? Humility. What makes a real man? Kindness. What makes a real man? Perseverance, hanging in there with people. So I think as Christians, there's an opportunity for us.
Where does Old Spice fit on that list? Or Club Man? I love the Club Man talc and aftershave.
My boys, it was Axe. The house smelled
That's
really bad. My house smelled really bad for about over a decade. But so I think this idea of trying to have a spiritual grounding is that's why that's why you and I do what we do. That's what my vocation has been. But again, you could say there was a mythology behind the Third Reich. There was certainly this muscular Christianity in the British Empire was really a cover for a lot of really heinous things and oppressions. And certainly our own country and the church has its own history as well. So, I do think Jesus is a model of what it means to be truly human. And for those of us that are males, can be truly man, but Jesus can be misappropriated in a mythical sense that has little to do with what the Bible actually says.
I remember in Tuscadilla at night, I like my Jesus in a tuxedo T-shirt. It says it's an air of formality, but he's ready to party. I like my Jesus to party. I want to say I'll just share one more quote from the review by Rowan Williams, which I thought is interesting. He says, in fairness, he does pick out some distinct trajectories within the stories, for example, in the narratives about Moses. But the expositions constantly shade into meandering polemic about a range of modern issues, especially gender, on which Peterson has made his position pretty clear elsewhere. Eve's yielding to the serpent's temptation, for instance, is viewed as the characteristically female error of sentimental, pseudo-compassionate acceptance of the unacceptable that you see in bad parents, especially mothers who cripple their children so that they can make a public show of their martyrdom and compassionate virtue. So it's a little, there you go.
Yeah, do you think Peterson had some mommy issues? It sounds like he's got some.
Possible.
Calling Dr. Freud, right? We're actually, I think the better reading of the story is Eve makes the typical human mistake of wanting to be like God. Adam makes a particularly male mistake of not only wanting to be like God, but throwing someone else under the bus.
Exactly. It's her fault. Yeah. The other, I mean, I like I said before, I do think to some degree what you could see in Peterson, and this is a book that, if I find a copy of it in the library, I might engage it a little bit, but I do think, if, for instance, in Friedrich Schleiermacher, the great 19th century theologian, there's an effort to sort of say what the essence of religion is, right? What when you look at, say, Christianity or Buddhism, Judaism, all these things, what's the essence of it? And he thinks it's something like absolute dependence, but that absolute dependence on this transcendent reality looks differently in Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism. It's always comes, there's no generic, it's always name brand. And I think in some sense, you have something like that going on in Peterson, right? It seems, although less theologically sophisticated, but sort of saying, hey, the essence of faith is this kind of struggle, to sort of maintain and engage in this critical tension of life, right, with self-discipline and order and structure, and how they're offered to us in traditions, and yet with integrating the shadow and dark side of life, and faith sort of making a coherent picture in which you can existentially engage and all that stuff. And so I think that I mean, maybe that's what he thinks is at the essence of religion, that if you went to Buddhism or to Christianity or Judaism, that basically these are all name brand ways of doing this general human universal practice.
Yeah. If he's interested in reading, though, stories from the Hebrew scripture to maybe get at what actual faith is, maybe Kierkegaard's reading of Abraham and Isaac might be an important corrective on his interesting understanding of, or lack of understanding of, faith.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. I'll say this in the Zizek Peterson debate. I'll throw the link to it in the show notes. I was quite impressed at how deeply Zizek, the atheist, understood Christianity, and in a very Chestertonian, Hegelian sort of way. Like, he loves Chesterton, and he sees in Chesterton stuff that his own Hegelian sensibilities really connected with. I mean, Zizek loves Christianity. He thinks it's endlessly interesting. Peterson seemed dumbfounded at certain points when they're talking about Christianity, and so he's one of these guys that seems, I think, because of his location on the cultural right, this you see this on Fox News, right? You see the atheists on Fox News always defending religion, right? Because that's what you just have to do, because you're a traditional cultural outlet and you have to do that. And I think that's kind of where Peterson is. It seems as though he's not quite fluent in religion and in religious practice, or the ability to understand the animating spirit behind people of faith. But he sees himself, I think, as a friend to faith, and wants to sort of engage it and give it, undergird it with a sense of meaning that comes from his own sort of clinical / philosophical background.
Yeah, but isn't there like an ultimate? I mean, that's sounding that way that you said it just now. Sounds both noble and incredibly condescending.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mean it to sound that way.
No, I mean, no, you were just being descriptive. But
yeah.
That Christianity or Judaism needs Peterson to help give it meaning, as opposed to maybe the tradition can help give him meaning. That might be a better approach for his soul. And maybe this is an extension of his journey. But
yeah, I also think my tendency also in reading text. So here's my theological prejudice, right? I think you always do better reading the Bible theocentrically, where God is the driving character, right? So I think the Aesop's fable way of reading things, it leads to oftentimes a kind of anthropomorphizing of the text and making the text into something that it's not. So I think the example I think classically of how you read a text is David and Goliath, right? And so this is how you often hear this preached, right? At least in a lot of Christian circles. Okay, you have these Goliaths in your life, right? So the Goliath could be, the looming divorce, or the anxiety caused by work, or late stage capitalism, or your own family trauma, whatever it is, right? The Goliaths in your life, the people that are unmanageable, or the sins you can't seem that are compulsive and you can't seem to course correct on, or what have you. And be like David in the midst of that, right? Be like David, who is, the underdog, right? He's, we love he's Hoosiers. He's, the Miracle movie, but the 1980 hockey team. David, is able to do this kind of stuff and be like David, as opposed to seeing, rather than identifying with David, identifying with the Israelites, who are oppressed by Goliath and the Philistines and struggle and need deliverance. And and really David becomes the presence of God in their life, right? So the story is less about being like David and more in the position of seeing how, just like God delivers the Israelites from this looming reality that is crushing their flourishing, so God is still part of that story in our lives, delivering us and trying to increase shalom in our own stories. So I mean, seeing yourself identified with the people of God being delivered and needing deliverance, I think, is a healthier way than seeing yourself, than making it into some Homeric or some sort of, we're meant to sort of imitate the heroes. I think the hero stuff just leads to a very thin reading of the Bible, which it seems like this is kind of, at the end of the day, and again, in fairness, neither of us have read the book. We engaged with a summary of it and some reviews, but this seems to be how Peterson comes to the Bible. It's not, God is not the center of the text. I mean, the center of the text is this existential human dilemma, which the biblical characters are examples of.
Right. And I actually think he is not alone in a thin reading of the Bible.
I think it's America.
I think, or most Christians, right?
Yeah.
In other words, the failure to understand the whole story, whether it being ignoring the Hebrew scriptures. I mean, the sin of Marcion, for instance, why Marcions ultimately weren't Christians, because they couldn't.
Bill, I saw it. I hung out with the Marcions.
Well, but because they can't. They don't know the God revealed in Christ if you don't know the God of the Hebrew scripture, the God of the story, because it's a long story. And it's I love that line in oh gosh, what is it? It's maybe in C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, redeemed humanity is still young. I love that line, that that we're still young. It's been we're still figuring out what that means. So at any rate, so that's why I think
it's like the opposite of what you feel like when you're in the New Jersey DMV. It's like I once was young. I did have things to live for at one point.
So there we go. As we entered Advent, just remember the Christian journey is the opposite of being in the New Jersey.
DMV, right? We are. Well, this is what Chesterton said, right? That we're as young as our dreams and as old as our cynicism. So the truth is that the eternal Father is younger than we are.
Right. And maybe Jordan Peterson is on the road to redemption. That's our prayer for all of us.
For all of us. Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Peace.